Hello everybody, welcome to Sane Game Studios. I'm Sane, I'm an amateur game developer. Today on Gamemaker Tutorials, I'm going to be taking a look at a very specific extension. We're going to be looking at input. So input is an extension that was developed by Aline, I think, Alynne, and Juju Adams, part of the Juju Adams extension library. They have a lot of extensions, and all the ones that I've used have been great. You would have seen ones in my Shadowcast lighting tutorial where I used Bulb by Juju Adams. So in this tutorial, we're going to be taking a look at input. So input is great. It is an overall input manager. So it replaces things like when you hard code, like, if keyboard check pressed, and then you put in, if this button was pressed. Instead, it's going to be used in enum as a constant, and it's going to handle the input for us. So the question you may be wondering to yourself is, why? Why would I want that? Why is that something that I would care about? And the answer to that is rather simple. Rebinding and icons. So that's probably the biggest thing that input is going to give you as a tool when it comes to your overall input management. It is going to give you the ability to very easily on the fly have built-in systems for rebinding your keys. So if you were to build a rebinding system yourself, there is a lot that goes into it, and it's pretty complicated. So we can take some of that complication off of ourselves and take some of that hard work and toil off of ourselves, and we can download this extension that is going to allow us to do that within the extension. There's built-in functions that you just call the function like you would any single other built-in GameMaker function, and you can just use those to set your rebindings. Icons are also a big part of it. So you can build a sprite library, and you can assign each key of like a keyboard or a gamepad to have a image associated with it, and then you can grab the icon index that is associated with that button, and you can draw it to the screen. And then when you rebind the key, so let's say I have something set to the space bar, and I change the space bar to the J, and then I go and look at my control settings, and where I was drawing the space bar, it is now going to automatically start drawing the J instead, right? So just very great, handy, awesome little things that input does, and it's all just built in a free to use, ready to plug into your program input manager. And if you're already really deep into your project, it is very easy to implement it after the fact. So with that all said, the next thing I'm going to do is, like with all my tutorials, I'm going to go over what I have for my project starting off. So I'm just going to go over what code already exists inside this project and just kind of walk through it quick. If that's something you don't care to watch, you can go ahead and use the timestamps provided to skip to the next timestamp, and that's where we'll be importing the input library. So for sprites, I just have a handful of sprites. I just have a falling sprite, an idle sprite, a jumping sprite, and a walking sprite. I'm using my common platformer that you guys have seen me use quite a bit for this. I just have two objects. I have OWall that has no code in it, and I have OPlayer. The OPlayer has a couple events already programmed in here. So the first thing I'm doing is I'm declaring my variables for getting my player input. I am declaring the variables I'm going to be using to calculate my movement. And I'm declaring the variables that I need to calculate said movement. And then finally, I have a Boolean to tell me whether or not I am currently on the ground. In the step event, I am grabbing those player input variables and I'm assigning them keys, and I am then using them to get my player input. I'm creating a local variable called move, and it's going to go key right minus key left to figure out the direction of desired movement. And then I am multiplying my walk speed by my move and punching that value into my horizontal speed. If I'm grounded, so if I'm on the ground and I hit the up key, I'm going to minus my jump height off of my vertical speed, and then every single frame I'm going to be adding gravity to my vertical speed regardless of what I'm doing. If I'm about to collide with a wall on the horizontal axis, I look to see if I have collided with it yet. And if I have not collided with it yet, I move towards it in increments. Otherwise, I set my horizontal speed to 0. I do the exact same thing on my vertical axis with my Y position and my vertical speed. The only difference is when I set my vertical speed to 0, I also set grounded to true. If the collision detection is not true, so if not place meeting, I am setting grounded to false. And then I am committing my movement by adding it to my X and Y position. If my horizontal speed does not equal 0, I'm setting my image X scale to equal the sine of my horizontal speed. And then if I am on the ground and my horizontal speed does not equal 0, I set my sprite index to equal my walking sprite. But if my horizontal speed does equal 0, I set my sprite index to be my idle sprite. Otherwise, it means I am not on the ground. If my vertical speed is less than 0, which means I am moving in the negative direction, which is up on the y-axis, I'm setting my sprite index to be s-player jump. Otherwise, so if my vertical speed is greater than 0, which means I'm moving in the positive direction, which is down on the y-axis, I set my sprite index to be s-player fall. And then if I run this project, you're going to see a very basic platformer. I can move, and I can jump. Nothing too fancy. I do have some basic camera controls, so if I go to my room here, I go viewports and cameras, viewport 0. I just have my camera following a player, and then I have set the horizontal and vertical border to put the player in the center of the camera. So with that out of the way, let's take a look at bringing input into my project and then applying it to my player. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my Internet Explorer, which I use Google Chrome. And right here I have offaline.github.io/input the readme. And this is the documentation. And actually, if you just Google input by Aline, it'll be your top result. And this is the documentation. It's essentially, it's like the Gamemaker manual. The only difference is it's just everything to do with input, because the Gamemaker manual knows nothing about input. And if you have questions about how to do things with this extension, the Gamemaker manual will not really be able to help you. And this is where you would go to figure things out. It's got a lot of handy tools. The first one really here being the newbie guide, and this will walk you through how to set it up. We're not actually going to go through this because I'm just going to show you guys how to set it up. But as you can see down the side here, they have explanations for everything that is input. And then if you click the download the YYMPS, it will take you to this page. And you can scroll down here, and right here, this input 1020, this is what you'll download. Once it's downloaded, you can then add it to your Gamemaker project. So to add an extension to your project, you're just going to go to Tools. You're going to go down to Import Local Package. And then you're going to find your package. So I'm using 1009. I do believe that the differences are rather minor. I think it's mostly ironing out some kinks. When I first started using input, I believe it was on version 8, maybe 7, and it's on version 10 now. Few things have changed, but it is still amazing. I had to relearn how to do certain things. So once you import the package, it's going to eventually open up this window. And very simply, I am just going to click Add All. And that just takes all of the package resources and then puts them over here under Resources to Import. And that's just going to bring the entire package into your project. I click Import, and it's going to create a input folder over in my asset browser. So over here in the input folder, you're going to want to go down to config, and you're going to want to click on input config verbs. And this is where you're going to start your input journey, generally speaking. So your input verbs are essentially going to be your actions. They are verbs. You assign a name to something that you want to be able to do in your project, right? So it starts off with the very basic, just up, down, left, right, accept, cancel, action, special, pause. But you can delete all these and you can create your own. I'm actually going to create a new one, and I'm going to call it Rebind. And that's going to be something that I'm going to be showing you guys how to do in this tutorial. We will be doing a very quick rebinding. And then here is where you define your verbs. So instead of being like keyboard check pressed VK up, instead you will just take that VK up and you will apply it here next to your up verb. So you just call a function that says input define verb, and you punch in all of the values. And these are the default values it comes with. So it'll come with, the VK up, and then it'll also say, or W. So what this means is like, if I hit the up key or the W key, then I will be hitting the up key. And then it also comes with default gamepad values. So this is just up on the left joystick, and that is the D-pad up. I don't want to be using these keys personally, so I am going to delete them. One of the greatest things about input is the fact that you can absolutely just punch in arrays. So like, right here, this is for the keyboard input, and I can put in an array and assign it multiple values. And then over here, you have the gamepad inputs, and it's going to assign multiple values. So one thing it does is it does the input define verb twice, and it does it once if you are not playing on Nintendo Switch, and then so if you are playing on a Nintendo Switch. And the only reason it does that is because on vast majority of controllers, the gamepad face 1 is the bottom of the 4 buttons on the face of your gamepad. It is the bottom. So it's X on PlayStation and A on Xbox. Whereas on Nintendo Switch, it's going to be B. And then the A is actually where circle and B go on the Xbox. It's just the way that the Nintendo Switch orients it. But Gamemaker doesn't accommodate for that. Gamepad face 1 is just the bottom button, regardless of what that bottom button is. Aline has set it up so that automatically it's going to see whether or not it's on a Switch. And if it is on a Switch, it's going to flip those two values. One new thing that Input has actually recently added is input clusters, where you can define a cluster and then define it with input verbs. And instead of if you watch my top-down movement tutorial, I use a 0 point and compare that to what my keys are being hit, and then use that point direction to figure out the direction of my movement. Input cluster does that for you, so you don't need to do that on your own. So I'm going to define my rebind verb. Say VK enter. And for this, I'm just going to go undefined because actually, you know what? I will define it. I'll say GP start. So if I hit the pause key, that will be my rebinding. So with that out of the way, I've defined my verbs. They have the buttons assigned to them. I am now going to go to my O player. I'm going to go to my step event. And here, instead of going keyboard check from my left and right key, I'm going to go input check. Input verb dot right. Input verb dot left. I never actually use the down key, so I'm going to get rid of it. Now I'm going to go input pressed, input verb dot up. And then actually if I run this right now, nothing's changed. The only thing that has changed is now I can grab my controller and still do it. The only thing I don't like about that is the fact that, here, I'm going to go config verbs. Up on the directional stick is not a good way to do jumping on a gamepad. So I'm going to change this to gamepad face 1. So I can hit I use an Xbox controller, so I can hit the A button to jump instead. There we go. That seems much more natural. And that is like the very basics of how you get input working on your project. You just import it, define your verbs, and then go and use the input checkers instead of the built-in checkers. And input has a ton of checkers. If you go and you look at the input documentation, you can go checkers. And these are all of the different checkers. There's pressed many, long released, long pressed, repeat, last, most recent. Like, there's a lot of input checkers. And there's a lot you can do with it. So another thing that I like to do is down here under input plugins, you can go binding icons, config, and then I can go to, let's just go keyboard. And here you can define icons. So this will be the binding, right? So this is for the A key. And then this is the default icon. If you had a sprite, you would just replace this with the sprite. You can be like S keyboard A. And if that is a sprite, then you'll be defining that sprite here. Otherwise, it defaults to strings. And it honestly it starts off just grabbing them all. And then it also has, here it is for Nintendo, for the Switch. Xbox. So let's take a quick look on how to deal with that. So I am going to go back to my player object. I'm going to add a new event, and I'm going to go draw GUI. And then I'm just going to go var jump key equals input icon get input verb dot up. And then I'm going to go draw text transformed. I'm going to put it at position 50 and Y20. The string is I'm going to punch in jump key because I know that that's a string. Blow up the size and set the angle to 0. See, it says that my up key is arrow up. But then if I press a button on the controller, it now says A because I'm using an Xbox controller. But then if I go back to my keyboard, it will use the keyboard. But let's say I want to rebind. I want my player to be able to change what keys do what. So normally I would have this built into a menu, or I would have a separate object that's doing that. Just for the sake of this tutorial, I am going to just do it here in the player event. So I'm actually going to create a new variable, and I'm going to call it device, and I'm going to have it equal undefined. And then down here in my step event, I'm just going to say device equals, alright, so yeah, device equals input player get device. And it defaults to 0, so 0 would be player 1. The extension itself has everything built in for getting multiplayer going, but I don't have multiplayer, nor do I really plan to add it, so I'm just going to use the default value of 0, and that's just going to get what type of device it is, and it's going to store it in this variable. Sorry. Var rebind equals input pressed input verb dot rebind if rebind. I didn't need to do that. I could have just said if input checked, but I don't like doing it. So just for the sake of showing you guys how to do this, I'm just going to have it so it rebinds the up key. I'm very simply just going to say input device set rebinding. The device is going to be device, and the state is going to be true, which means I'm setting rebinding to true, which means that what this does is it essentially turns off input and turns the game into a listener from the device, and it's going to listen for any input from the device, and then it's going to return the value of whatever that input is. So I'm going to say if input device get rebinding device. So this is going to tell me whether or not I am currently scanning for a new input. And if I am, I'm going to create a local variable. I'm going to call it new binding. And it is going to equal input device get rebinding result device. And then I'm going to say if new binding does not equal undefined. So it's going to be listening for a binding, for an input, and if it gets an input, it's going to store it in this value. Otherwise, this value is going to be undefined. So if this value is not undefined, which means that a new input has been detected, I'm going to go input binding set safe. So the first thing it's going to do is it's going to ask if it's for a gamepad. And to figure out whether or not it's for a gamepad, I'm just going to punch in a new function. Input device is gamepad device. The verb that I'm going to replace is going to be input verb dot up, and the new binding is going to be new binding. And then I'm going to go input device set rebinding device false. So there is a couple different ways that you can set your new binding. I chose set safe for a very specific reason, but there's also just set. But what set safe will do is it will grab the new binding, it will compare it to all of the existing verbs, and if the new binding is assigned to another verb, it will still change this verb to this binding, but will also grab the binding of this verb and set the other verb to have its binding. So it will just swap the bindings. Whereas if you go input binding set, then it won't deal with conflicts like that. It will just straight up set the binding. And as far as I know, you can have multiple keys have the same verb binding, and that's not something we really want. We don't want jump to also be left. So if I run this now, I can see arrow up is my jump key. But I'm going to hit enter and then press space. And now space is my jump key. And then if I were to change to a gamepad and I hit start and then let's say the left bumper, that now becomes my jump key. So it handles rebinding and icons very nicely. So like I said, there is a lot of things that input can do. I use input in all of my projects because it honestly just makes input management in my projects much simpler. And it is a great tool. And like I said, it's free to use. I also think their licensing says that credit is optional, Don't quote me on that. But as I've said before, if you're going to use somebody's asset, somebody's tools, and they say that credit is optional, don't be that guy. Credit them anyways. But yeah, input is great for complicated input checks. It's great for very simple rebinding. It's great for universal input icon management. So like in my I'll show you guys actually soon in my other project that I just did the devlog on. I have a actually I can show you guys real quick here. So if I go to my menu, I can go over here. I have my options. Right, I got my volume settings. If I go to control settings, I can go gameplay. And here are all of my gameplays. And as you can see, I have icons for everything. Right, so if I decide to change like this value to be my clicking the left stick, right, the icon changes as well. Like I say, so like move up, set to the up key. So if I try to set item 3 to the up key, what it's going to do is it's going to swap them so that up's going to become the D key, and then item 3 is going to become the up key. And these are all things that input just does for you. So yeah, that is input. Like I said, it is absolutely wonderful. I highly recommend using input. The Juju Adams and the people that he works with, they have a Discord group called Gamemaker Kitchen, where people are always cooking up new things for Gamemaker. And if you have questions about how to use input, you can go ahead and ask it there. They have a thread there just for input. When I was first learning how to do this, I'm pretty sure I got on their nerves asking them all the questions that I had trying to learn how to use the system. But now that I know how to use the system, I always use it. Like I said, it's wonderful. So yeah, that's all that I have for today. I really hope that this tutorial has helped you out. I really hope that you go and look into input because it is honestly awesome. If you have any questions, either about input or about what I've done here today or why I like input so much, you can go ahead and put those in the comments down below. If you have any tutorial suggestions, put those in the comments down below as well. I'm always looking for new ideas on new things that I can do for tutorials. Other than that, I'm just going to say the usual YouTuber jargon and just say please like and subscribe to this video. It really helps me out. I hope you guys are having a good one. Peace out.